Hello, my name is Martina Albertova, and I'm a founder and CEO of Meaning Global, which is a strategic brand intelligence consultancy that helps brand and business leaders bridge the gap of meaning between brands and organizations on one hand and culture and society on the other. And today, I would like to talk to you a bit more about this concept of the gap of meaning, precisely how brands can bridge this gap of meaning and how we can use semiotics systemically to measure cultural complexity and transform it into value. So why is it actually so important to talk about semiotics today? It's because of meaning. Meaning is the most valuable business currency of the 21st century. Most brands and organizations today are actually not fit for purpose anymore. They are buried in the vast amounts of data, but they lack sense and meaning to make their operations more strategic and purposeful. Semiotics studies and analyzes how meaning is created, consumed, reproduced in our culture and society, and how brands reinforce meanings to create new social realities. Meaning is what people actually value and consume in brands. It's the inner value of all things. But when brands don't make sense anymore, they can't really hold their value, which is where semiotics comes into play as an approach that helps to restore and inflate their inner value again. However, the biggest blind spot, and therefore also the biggest liability, which is meaning, is the biggest untapped resource for brands to grow and to create more value in business today. And this is something very similar to what I actually talked to you about last year here in the webinar in NewMR. I talk a bit more about meaning architecture, which is an approach that I created that looks at inefficiencies in brand, organizational, and business systems from the point of view of meaning, and uses semiotics to sort of trace and then fix these systemic problems. So what I was talking about last year, really, just in a nutshell, is that semiotics is not just for brands and marketing. It's also a powerful resource for businesses and organizational change, as meaning is at the core of any purposeful communication, transformation, value creation, or organizational, social, and political change. I was also talking a bit more about the fact that semiotics is the inner structure of our world, as everything in our lives is signified. Everything around us communicates and everything conveys meaning. Symbols, really, when you think about it, symbols are above the physical, tangible reality, as everything that we see around us today was first an abstract idea in somebody's mind that later manifested in its physical material form. I was also talking a bit more about the fact that semioticians really are the culture hackers. They are the neos, if you like Matrix. They are the neos of this world, fixing errors in the system, be it business system or brand system, organizational, or even society at large, and tracking these errors back to their original source code, which is the culture. And hacking culture systems allows organizations to see where the real value is. This way, semioticians can become the hackers of value creation and growth for businesses. We just need to start seeing meaning as the self-organizing principle for culture change as it really is. And to do this, we need to redefine semiotics as the cultural systems thinking for businesses and brands to allow for a systemic view of meaning patterns across brand ecosystems and fix these complex problems on accurate levels of the cultural system. So this was a bit more about the theory of meaning architecture, as I sort of envisioned that semiotics could work where it really applied to businesses and to solving complex business challenges. So when I talked about it last year, it was still very much a theoretical concept. But the good news is that with the evolution of different businesses and offerings in the marketplace, within a year, it's actually become a reality. So today we can actually do all these things in practice, and I'll tell you how. But one more segue before I do. To be able to do this, we of course need to make this mental leap from what we perceive semiotics to be, which is very much a science or applied methodology in the context of brands and marketing, and actually reframe how semiotics is used and viewed in the industry and what problems it serves to fix for clients. So what I believe semiotics actually needs to find new ways of application is a new master narrative for business use. Semiotics really lacks this master narrative. It lacks the clear explanation of what it does, what it's used for, why, and with what business results, and how it can be applied to maximize business value. And the absence of a more systemic approach to meaning making is the reason why semiotics is often relegated to the ad hoc or the niche market research box, instead of being viewed as the highway of meaning or the mental superstructure that cuts through all businesses, brands, and organizational decisions, which is a position that semiotics truly deserves, which is because it's much more of a meta-science of human cognition, really, rather than a methodology that fixes errors in brand communication. So to unlock the true power of semiotics, we must learn to apply it systemically. Why we need to do this? What is happening in the world around us? What is happening in the marketing industry today? Why do we need to apply semiotics systemically? Well, it's because there is actually a deepening divide between brands and corporations on one hand, and culture and society today. There is a symbolic gap between our lived social reality, which is the reality that we live as a society day to day, and the simulated reality portrayed by brands and corporations through advertising or marketing communication. And this gap is sort of widening year by year. This is why there is an urgent need for brands to actually reconceptualize, or for brand managers to reconceptualize how brands are managed and how they produce meaning, as their messages influence how we see and understand our own social reality, and what identities do we identify with, what social roles are out there for us to sort of identify with and mimic, and what cultural meanings do we take for granted when it comes to important social concepts such as manhood, womanhood, diversity, illusion, or unity. And you can see this deepening or widening symbolic divide, or the gap of meaning, as I like to call it, when you look at what's been actually happening in the marketing discourse over the past 2 years. So global brands are increasingly becoming irrelevant and out of touch with the reality. But the problem is that the relevance is actually tied to brand value. So in other words, when brands are culturally irrelevant, it actually stunts their growth. They cannot grow properly. So when you look at campaigns such as Dove Body Diverse product packaging from 2017, which is a sort of a literal metaphor of a female body diversity translated into shape of a shower gel bottle, which was very sort of tone deaf way of portraying female diversity. Or when you look at Gillette and their latest campaign, "The Best Men Can Be," from this January. And I'll talk about this campaign a little bit more in just a minute. So they are obviously portraying the progressive view of masculinity, but in a sort of very outdated, residual way. Or if you look at the now infamous Pepsi Kendall Jenner ad from 2017, that really created very vague expressions of global diversity and unity. The accidental racism of the H&M product photo shoot with the little black boy dressed in a very inappropriately dressed in a green hoodie with the big text on the front saying "coolest monkey in the jungle," or the Prada keychain from 2018, or now the Gucci sweater, again tapping into very sort of culturally inappropriate codes of blackface. Or even the Puma House of Hustle from 2018, which was sort of tapping into the culture of hustle and glorified poverty. So you can really see brands, and it might be due to the fact that that their strategies are quite lacking in inspiration, or it could be the fact that they really don't know how to actually execute on these rich cultural ideas. But whatever the reason is, the cultural irrelevance actually is a systemic problem. And these brain fails show a systemic inability of brands to reflect reality as it actually is and create diversity as an output. And brands misstepping their cultural mark are actually eroding or distorting social relevance of important cultural concepts, such as precisely these, such as diversity or unity or masculinity, femininity, or race or body image, and then giving us images or ideas that are quite distorted. Cultural irrelevance is everywhere around us these days, and it's the primary reason why brands can't grow and why they lose significant value in business today. So the traditional market research and consulting models fail to provide us with sufficient answers anymore because they don't see the big and small in its immediate context. And systemic problems require a different kind of logic and a new type of contextual thinking to prevent lapses and optimize solutions for how humans actually behave and value things and create meaning. And brands need to find these new mechanisms in order to accurately portray a lived human experience to maximize their own value. And semiotics can actually fix this symbolic divide. This is a method that redefines and reframes meaning, which is what people consume in brands, as is the essence of what they value. So with this idea in mind, I have actually created a new idea or new overarching idea or a new proposition for my own consultancy as well, which is very much centered on the core concept of the gap of meaning. So my goal or my ambition is to help brands and businesses really bridge this gap of meaning between brands and organizations on one hand and culture and society on the other, to maximize value creation and cultural relevance. But the most important question that we should ask ourselves here is, why do global brands actually keep falling into this gap of meaning in the first place? And I wrote a bit more about this in my recent article for Branding Strategy Insider. That was last week, actually. It was republished by Vox. And the simple answer to this question is, it's because of their lack of symbolic coherence. So the gap of meaning is a sort of symbolic trap that makes things look good on the surface as a form, but doesn't quite add up or make sense on the inside, which is the substance of the message. And these mental disconnects can occur between meaning intended and versus meaning created, between ideas and their form of execution, or between brand values and the real world behaviors of brands. And what this really tells us is that marketers cannot create strategies in a vacuum from the real world, as if they do, the reality portrayed will not resemble to how people look and behave in reality, and therefore will fail to resonate with them and create new value. And there are four biggest gaps of meaning. And I will show you these gaps on the example of the Gillette's latest campaign. So the first gap is the gap of culture. It is the gap between brands and organizations on one hand and culture and society on the other. So what Gillette actually intended to portray here was a sort of new take on a new evolving progressive man. But for some reason, the cultural ideals that they chose to express were very troubling if you look at it from this point of view of form and a substance. So it shows a big tension between the familiarity of the image with the very unfamiliar underlying message, or the progressive social ideals versus traditional way of portraying them. It's talking about the fact that men should be more empathetic and men should be more mindful of their surroundings and not harass women, or that little boys shouldn't fight with each other, but then really chooses to basically portray men adopting culturally residual or outdated behaviors, such as having a barbecue and really being positioned in this traditional role of a dad. So here the core idea is that organized sameness really is neither diversity nor is it a desired social ideal of manhood. The lead image shows a gap between the imagined reality and the social reality of real consumers. The quick question that we should ask here is what you're saying and doing culturally relevant anymore? And we should look at the legacy values and behaviors versus what is relevant in our culture and society today. This is the meaningful and valuable versus irrelevant, redundant, and obsolete exercise that affects the brand's future relevance and meaningfulness, value creation, and growth. The second gap is the gap of context. It's the gap between the big idea on one hand and then creative execution and brand experience on the other. So here the core challenge with this campaign is that cultural strategy alone will not save brands. It must be contextualized with brands' actual business. So the task really for marketeers and for advertising agencies, the task at hand is not about what masculinity means in culture today, but what the new meaning of masculinity means for Gillette and its core audience. So cultural strategy without relevant commercial execution or contextualization of this cultural strategy within the brand's actual business doesn't work. It will create nonsense, basically. So what Gillette aimed to present here was a beautiful, uplifting message executed in a very disempowering way. It sounded patronizing, talking to men and boys as if they were all predators in the making, which is not a good message to send out to your male audience, especially if the brand's equity was built on the concept of traditional masculinity. So it's actually quite divisive to the brand as well. Brands should communicate to everybody with respect, and to reinforce the message in the right context, you need to know what these ideas and cultural concepts mean to you as a brand first, then to your customers, and lastly in the context of culture. So the key question to ask here is what you're saying and doing contextually relevant? And here we look at the creative and cultural ideas versus their framing and execution, which together create final meaning and brand experience. This is the intended versus the unintended meaning exercise that affects the brand corporate image and the future perception of brand's key attributes. The third gap is the gap of trust. It's the brand image, values, and ideals on one hand, and the actual real-world corporate behaviors on the other. And this is perhaps the biggest gap of meaning in business today, precisely between what brands say and stand for and what they actually do. And the lack of accountability for brands' own actions creates a sort of toxic whale of illusion and deception. So in case of Gillette again, which is a brand in the P&G portfolio, a brand advocated social inclusion, gender equality, and a new inclusive world cannot charge a paying tax on female products simultaneously. Brand purpose was wrongly relegated to a quick consciousness band-aid without carefully thinking through the implications of such strategy onto the real world at large to be carried through by the brand's corporate behaviors. So purpose needs to guide not just brands, but organizational behavior as such as well. So the key question to ask here is what you're saying relevant and trustworthy, given that it's you saying it? And here we look at the total sum of brand and corporate ideals, such as values or mission, vision, and purpose, versus how well they are being translated into the real-world actions via corporate behaviors, policies, and consumer experience across touch points. This is the intangible to tangible exercise that affects the brand's future integrity and purpose. The last and fourth gap is the gap of social impact. So it's the role and identity of a brand versus the message and tonality that the brand portrays in their communication. And what was really problematic here precisely was that brands really don't have a political mandate to tell people what is right and what is wrong and how to behave in society. It's not their role to police social conduct, and to assume that they do is really deeply disturbing. Brands can guide our actions by inspiring us, by giving us ideals to desire, by emulating values worthy to aspire to, but not explicitly through norming our own social conduct. Gillette missed the mark by overestimating its own importance in people's lives. The ad conveyed a well-motivated and important message spoken by the wrong entity, which ultimately distorted its cultural validity. So purpose serves as a moral compass to guide the brand's own actions. It's not to position brands in a role of a social watchdog to guide ours. So the key question here is, do you have the mandate to be saying what you're saying in the first place? And here we look at who the brand organization is, the identity, values, worldview, actions, and the role in the life of its customers, versus the message the brand intends to communicate in the world, what and how you want to say it. This is the accountability exercise that affects the brand's future trustworthiness and customer loyalty. So, having talked about these 4 fundamental gaps of meaning in business and marketing today, what is really the task at hand, what we really need to focus on right now is how to bridge this gap and how to ultimately jump from the old reality to the new reality. And I really believe that in the new reality, we need to start seeing and managing brands as dynamic ecosystems of cultural meaning. Brands need to adapt and constantly evolve to align with the cultural fabric of our society. But to be able to do that, they need to first know how to navigate it. So, and this is the point where I talked about last year, it was a theory. Today, we can actually do it. Today is actually becoming a reality. So when the art and the science of meaning making come together, now we can make the theory the new reality for brands and businesses. So earlier this year, in February to be precise, I started collaborating with a new tech startup called Signoi, which is a really nice wordplay of signal out of the noise, Signoi. And I started collaborating with them last month as a strategy consultant, and a core part of the Signoi team to strengthen the strategy and cultural foresight proposition, and also help build the consulting and advisory layer, and develop new frameworks for measuring meaning to help clients maximize value creation and navigate sense amid global cultural complexity. But what Signoi does actually is that it's using smart technology and automated analytics to decode cultural signals from the noise of unstructured data, be it text or imagery, and help clients analyze, measure, interpret, and transform meaning at speed and scale in an intuitively human way. So it's a quantified cultural analytics tool that makes it possible to actually apply semiotics systemically, which is something that we weren't really able to do before, by helping clients measure meaning to make sense of their everyday cultural realities. And in the analytical layer, its core task is to deliver a new measured revelation. So it measures meaning, it looks at clients' outcomes such as home, what you express and what people feel about your brand or organization, neighborhood terrain, the cultural weather, which is the broad cultural atmosphere within which we exist. It looks at different analytical models such as universal energies and semiotic codes, explicit signals, archetypology, the meaning space, implicit signifiers, cultural codes, transitory expressions, and also uses different metrics to trace and measure the strength of signals in culture. So when I talked about the art and science of meaning, the reason why it's important to talk about is that meaning is a complex discipline. We are reimagining how organizations make meaning in the digital age by merging the two sides of meaning making, the analytical and process-driven, and the cognitive and creative side. So the data side, it's all about the outside-in perspective. Without the ability to make sense of these vast amounts of data, brand and business leaders are suffering from the analysis paralysis. And this psychological state is when inertia kicks in, which further disables people to make informed decisions to optimize their future strategy. And then on the other side, which is the more cognitive or creative side, it's all about the inside out. It's all about looking at meaning from the human perspective. And from the human perspective, because as we said, meaning is what people actually value in things, be it brands or being relationships or being even their own relationships with themselves and with the world that they live in. It's a deeply personal and human experience to us. And it's also natural to make meaning, as it is how our minds are wired. We are essentially walking, talking, meaning-making machines. And this is why semiotics is so incredibly fascinating, because it's innately human. So what we actually realized is that to create a sort of total approach to meaning making, or holistic proposition, and look at meaning from these two sides at the same time, we need to create a new methodology, and we call it the Amite Method, which is essentially 4 steps towards more effective meaning management. So this framework will help you analyze, measure, interpret, and transform meaning. And with all of these 4 important parts of organizational or brand meaning management covered, we are able to, on the process-driven data side of the meaning measurement, we are able to analyze the existing client data points and environmental data, such as cultural or category or social network data, and then measure the current meaning footprint across key cultural category and customer dimensions. And then on the more human side, which is all about the meaning creation, we are able to interpret what this situation means in the context of culture and your brand and corporate strategy, and then transform this into new meaning. So transform the existing meaning into new and more effective and informed cultural proposition and a new symbolic territory. And thanks to this complete 4-step approach to meaning making, we can help organizations trace and solve complex brand, business, and cultural challenges on a systemic level. The Amite technique helps clients not only make sense of the big data and cultural complexity that they operate in daily, but create more powerful and actionable narratives to capitalize on the direction of culture change and transform their organizational meaning. This way, we can envision better futures for businesses across cultures and industries and help leaders bridge the gap of meaning once and for all. Thank you very much.